So, welcome everyone to our live stream. We're doing a tier list of all the units relevant to Black Templars in the Space Marine Codex, and we're going to rank them all uh, through S through F. And just a couple quick notes. Just so you're aware, we did combine some of these units together, specifically Apothecaries, Techmarines, Land Speeders, Storm Speeders, Land Raiders, um, Gladiators, and Ancients
And
into just
Predators.
what's that?
And the Predators.
And the Predators. Thank you. Into one category for each of them, simply because they're so similar to each other that it's really just war gear almost in most cases. They play they're functionally the same on the tabletop, as far as that. So, for the sake of ease of talking about three different types of, land raiders, gladiators, two different types of, you know, predators, etc., we just put them all in one category because it doesn't change their ranking by combining them. So we're just going to get started here. We're going to go page by page through the codex and talk about each unit briefly and what is our ranking for them. So to start us off, we are at the Primaris Captain, and this includes all of his various loadouts, including the Indominus loadout. Does not include the other data sheets. We're separated the captain because they play differently enough on the table to warrant separate categories. So, generic Primaris Captain. Bob, where would you put this guy at?
He's a solid A, in my opinion. He's a good all-rounded piece on the battlefield with that aura. Be able to buff your characters. Also gives you a good close combat unit if he gets into melee. But his main role is going to be providing you with that aura and potentially a warlord trait to buff up your other units. So he's a great piece to have on the board. And obviously you need an HQ. Yep. You're going to be deciding essentially between him and a Chaplain.
Yeah, I agree. I think his ability to take that excellent relic shield and mastercrafted power sword is really great. It helps fit him more in line with being a frontline captain, which is great for us. He wants to be up there buffing our forward troops. So I think A tier is right where he needs to be. Moving on to the newest addition to the captain is going to be the captain with the mastercrafted heavy bolt rifle. This is the guy that is in Gravis armor, the second guy in Gravis armor, and is also the one that just most recently came out. Not available by himself yet, but he was part of the Pariah Nexus kill team box. Where are we going to put this guy?
All right, so this one I personally feel is going to be in the B tier. He's still useful to the battle. He's going to be a little bit more niche, though. He does have that mastercrafted power sword, which gives him the ability to be in close combat. He does have the additional toughness, as well as the rapid firing heavy bolt rifle, which is decent. He's just not in the style typically that we would take with our typical Marines, and his points cost makes him a little bit more prohibitive to be taken on the board. In addition, he's a lot slower than many of our other troops are that we're going to be keeping him with.
An inch of movement.
Yeah.
He's a little more durable.
He's not quite as useful.
He's got the tough 5 and the extra wound, which is nice. But I agree. I think he's, like you said, he's not a bad unit by any means. We think he's in B tier. He's just not really necessarily fitting in the style of how we want to play. But he's certainly usable, in an army.
So, yep, absolutely.
All right, moving on.
Right, next up, we have
Go ahead.
Our captain in Phobos armor.
Yeah,
How do you feel
so
about him, Alex?
I think this guy is A tier. He has concealed positions, which is awesome. He has a camo cloak, which means that if you put him in cover, he's getting +2 to his save, which gives him a 1+ save in cover, which is awesome. He has the Mastercrafted Instigator Bolt Carbine, which allows him. It's a 30-inch assault 1, which is excellent gun, and it allows him to ignore Lookout Sir. I think especially if you're in a Psyker heavy meta, this guy is a great option to take because he is really great with the Witch Seeker bolts. It's only one shot anyway, is his gun, so you're not losing anything by only being able to fire one shot, and he hits on 2s, which means more often than not you're going to hit with that Witch Seeker bolt. And then if you manage to get his the wound roll through, I mean it's a damage 3 gun, so you could do some heavy damage to enemy psychers with this guy. And then of course like I said, he's forward deploying, so he has the ability to be upfront with our other troops, and he's also got Omni Scramblers, so you can't deep strike within 12 inches of him. So he's got a lot of benefits.
Yeah, he's a niche, but very good in the role that he plays. As mentioned, those Blessed Bolts are a great combo with him. He can take out some of those nastier characters that are going out and doing some bad things to you. Death Guard come to mind here. Dark Angel, Librarians are kind of nasty. So he definitely fills a role for us. Quite powerful in what he does. He's just not going to be able to contribute much to the close combat game, but
Yeah.
that's not why you're taking him. So
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, I mean, I feel like, taking characters that are fighty is fine for us, but we are generally better off with characters that are buffing our units, like our Vanguard Vets and our Terminators and things like that. So our characters don't necessarily need to be in combat for us to be winning games. So, it's okay that he's not super great in close combat. All right.
So then we
moving
have our
on.
captain in Gravis armor.
Yep.
Now this one I a little bit biased against. From a look standpoint, I hate him.
Yeah.
But he's a solid B for me.
The new Gravis guy looks much better, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. The Gravis armor captain, he still fulfills all the things that you wanted to have for buffing. He's a 5 movement. He has some really close-up weaponry that you need, but aren't really conducive to an effective build. There's not really a whole lot to say about him. He just does not really fulfill what you want. He's not fast enough to get across the board with
those melee weapons that he has there.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's nice that he's got 2 different melee options, but the number of times that you'll be using those is probably going to be slimmer, because he is slower. So I agree with you. I think he fits in with the other Gravis captain. So that brings us to a classic, the captain in Terminator armor.
Yeah, he does have that slow speed that the Gravis has, with that additional wound that makes him a little bit nicer. But he does have the benefit of being able to deep strike in. So if you want to bring that surprise element to the board with some Terminators, you can do that. But with that being said, deep striking is a little bit of a risky strategy. We tend to try and walk across the board, and there's better options for getting things across the board and buffing. So I would put him in the B tier.
Yeah, Yeah, I agree. He does have a 2+ save, which is nice because he's in Terminator armor. Like you said, that ability to deep strike, which can mitigate his slower speed a little bit. He can take a relic blade, which is cool. Relic blades are excellent. Um, so so yeah, so he's again, sort of the same with the Gravis guys. Not a bad take, but not necessarily a good one either. All right, so that brings us to our generic Space Marine Captain.
All right. So the generic captain, it doesn't have the problem with the mobility. So he's still walking at the 6 inches, but he doesn't have the durability that those Gravis have. But he does have a little bit more ability to take a little bit more wide-ranged weaponry. And he does benefit for being cheap. So that is definitely something that's important to take. Obviously, he still does some buffing. He can take the jump pack, which is still an option for you to take. Typically, we'll be taking other options for that for additional mobility, which we'll get to in just a moment. But he's not a bad take. He's kind of a in between a B and A tier for me. If I had to pick one, I would still probably stick him in the B tier, simply because Primaris is a little bit better for what you're paying for him, with only marginable point increases.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I'm going to run a generic captain, it probably would be with a jump pack, simply because he gets that extra mobility. He could run alongside Vanguard vets or wherever you need him to go. He is also, we'll talk about this later on a little bit, but you could put him in if you needed some captain support in a drop pod. He's nice and cheap to get some rerolls to hit in a drop pod. So that's an option for him as well. So yeah, I would agree. I think B tier, maybe more like B plus tier if there was such a thing. So yeah. All right, that brings us to Captain on a Bike.
This guy's good. All right, so this is a firstborn. If you're going to be taking a firstborn captain, this is the guy you're taking. So I'm very high on him right now. He has that additional toughness. He's got the speed to back him up. Even with a solid 3+ save, he's really decent. You
Top
can take him
5.
with a storm shield. All right, yeah, top 5. Yep.
So,
So
yeah, where does he fall for you?
I would almost take him in the S tier. It's really tough. He's a solid A. Solid A. I'm not quite S tier, I would say, but it's a roll of the dice on that. He's really finding himself in many of my lists right now, just because of his mobility and the ability to get across the board and still project that aura to all of my advancing units.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you give him something like the Crusade helmet. A lot of my lists also take the Teeth of Terror to give him a little bit of a close combat threat.
Mm-hmm. Teeth of Terror is a great take on him. Keeps him cheap. It's a great weapon. He'll be able to use it where he wants. He can help clear out some of that chaff with your forward-moving units. And he has some nice options. He can take whatever he wants from the melee weapon list. He can even take a mastercrafted bolt gun if you want, which is nice. I wouldn't take him with a combi weapon except maybe a storm bolter. And the only thing that I'm sad he can't take is a relic blade. That would be amazing if he could take a relic blade.
Yeah, that would be huge.
Unfortunately, he does not get that. But he's great because he can keep up with, if you're running a really fast moving list, 30 Vanguard vets or something, lots of attack bikes. He'll be able to keep up with all that stuff. So really, really great.
And
take.
for 100 points,
Mm-hmm.
oof.
Yeah. Yeah, durability. If you want him extra durability, a storm shield isn't a bad take on him either. Um, so yeah. Only catch with him is you're gonna have to kit bash him. That's the biggest challenge, honestly, because there's not really a model. You see, I use the con on a bike model image here because there isn't one. So yeah. All right. So Primaris Lieutenant. This includes the guy um, who is the Indominus one, where you can take a Storm Shield and the Volkite pistol, as well as all his previous options that he could take, power swords mainly, some plasma pistols, and sort of things like that.
All right. So these guys are really, I'm gonna kind of jump ahead of the game here. Really, lieutenants provide a buff, and they're really a poor man's captain. But if we're going to be taking something with a lieutenant base, honestly, I'm probably going for a chaplain. So these guys are going to be a solid B. They don't really give me enough to really want to take them.
Yeah.
The reason why I would really go with the chaplain or the captain over them is so that we get those reroll to ones to possibly proc our Knights of Sigismund, whereas the Primaris is obviously the rerolls to the wound. It's the same increase in damage unless you get through to the Knights of Sigismund. So that's where that big change is. And really their armor or their weaponry is not really much different. You get the Neo Volkite, but
Yeah. Honestly, they could almost be in C tier for me. They don't bring enough to the table to make me want to take them over another HQ choice. And I mean, reroll ones is nice, but if I'm taking a Dreadnought of literally any kind, I can get that reroll to ones to wound from the Dreadnought.
yeah,
So
that's fair.
so yeah, to me they don't really bring too much to the table. I would personally put them in C tier. As much as I like the
Yep.
Indominus model because it's on point, it's badass. So all right, moving on in the lieutenants. The lieutenant in Reaver armor.
Okay. So this is an interesting one.
Yep.
So you will see that Alex and I have a fundamental philosophy difference on the Reavers.
Yes, we do.
The stratagem support on the Reavers are amazing. Now, the lieutenants are a way to get some of those Reaver abilities across the board, but it takes up a precious HQ slot. So most of our lists are going to be using like Vanguard, Patrol maybe. So we only have access to the 2 HQs.
Yeah.
And really, you're going to probably want a chaplain or maybe a captain in that slot. So you can't really fit them. That's why you might necessarily be taking the lieutenant over the Reavers. But the ability to shut down objective secured on your opponent and potentially their actions, it can't be overstated. They're a great way to throw threat projection across the board, not because of their damage, but because of their stratagem use. But the key with that is you need to have the CP to be able to use it, and you have to get them safely across the board, which unfortunately Games Workshop did not give them access to Deep Strike like other Reavers.
Yep.
So that's kind of a problem.
Yeah. The problem with the 2 Phobos lieutenants is, to me, a fundamental design philosophy problem with Games Workshop. Something that I've noticed is that a lot of times Games Workshop tends to make a model and then tells the rules team to make rules for it. So that's sort of backwards because as we'll see in a minute with the generic Phobos Lieutenant, they sort of have backwards roles, and neither one of them has concealed positions, which is weird to me. Because you'd think that they would want to deploy with, other Phobos troops, which all do. So it's just kind of weird to me that the way they did that, and it's a bit backwards. So you end up with stuff like the Reaver guy who doesn't go with the Reavers, and the Phobos guy who doesn't fit with the other Phobos dudes. So
Yeah.
it makes it a little weird. But for the Reaver Lieutenant, I think, like you said, he gets all the same stratagem support that Reavers do, and specifically the one that we're talking about is Terror Troops, which is pretty awesome. It allows you to shut down objectives secured, things like that. He also has Smokescreen and Shock Grenade keywords, so you can make use of those stratagems as well. So it's if you're not wanting to run Reavers, because as Bob and I will, I'm sure, disagree on later on, Reavers are not a good unit to take, generally speaking. This might be an alternative for you. That being said, as you said, he takes up a precious HQ slot, and yeah, lieutenants can take 2 to a slot, but if we're kind of struggling to take 1 to justify 1 in a list, why are we taking 2? Is sort of the big question there. So I would probably slot him into C tier along with the other lieutenant. What do you think?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That we might as well keep talking about the Phobos guys. I know he's not the next on the page, but the lieutenant in Phobos armor. This guy can deep strike. He has the I think he does. At least he. Let's look at his.
Yep, he has death from above.
Yep, there it is. Yep. So yeah. So he can deep strike, but honestly, he doesn't bring anything else that's interesting. He's essentially equipped like an Incursor that can deep strike, but he doesn't have anything besides his just standard tactical precision. I would probably put this guy in D tier. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, he's, lieutenants, the basic ones are better. The only thing that's interesting about him is getting the access to the Phobos warlord traits.
Yeah.
But realistically, those aren't good enough for us to be really taken in.
Not for a lieutenant, no. So D tier it is. So it brings us to our firstborn lieutenant.
C, for all the same reasons the Primaris ones, except Primaris ones are even a little bit better. So I would even maybe even take them down to a D, honestly.
Yeah, he can take a jump pack, so it's okay, but again, if I'm taking a character in a jump pack, it's probably going to be a chaplain, or barring that, a captain. So
he does have some niche uses in drop pod lists where you can get a couple of them out and get some buffing into some of those more dangerous units if you do that. But yeah, not enough to the table to really be useful.
Yeah, I agree.
And we burn those witches, so we're skipping
those pages.
Those have already been burned. And it brings us to the Primaris Chaplain.
Yep.
I got that smoke burning flesh in my nose. I gotta take a sip of water.
Nice. I sent that Primaris Lieutenant to C ranking. Nice. So the Primaris Chaplain. I think for me, he's in between B or an A tier. You're not going to do bad taking one. There just are better other chaplains to take. What do you think?
I'll be honest, I kind of like them. So we're going to talk about... sorry, Mike. we're going to talk about the special characters who might actually be useful. But if you're not playing a forward advancing list where you really kind of want to get to Chaplain on a jump pack or on a bike, he's good for overlapping auras.
Yep.
Get that Master of Sanctity on him. He can walk with your Captain or maybe your Helbrecht, and you have that additional wound and attack. I personally think he's a good solid A. Honestly, he's cheap. You can take all those Master of Sanctity on him, and he'll do really, really well in that role. He's got some good weaponry for him.
Yeah, he's got the Absolver Bolt pistol, which, I mean, pistols are not a reason to take a character by any means, but it's a little extra, over the standard Chaplain. He's got the extra wound because he's Primaris and an extra attack. I would agree. I would put him in A. Plus, the Indominus model is really cool looking. It's very much more Black Templar, I think, than the original one.
Yeah, I think they're a great solid HQ unit. Litanies are going to be something you're going to want at least one chaplain in every list that you take.
Yep.
So that's a good option for you if you don't have the points to get the bike, which is our next one on the list.
Yeah.
So this is definitely an S tier.
Yep.
No I don't even think there's any argument about that.
Nope. And it's a badass.
This guy's just.
Boot. He just is. Yeah. He has it all going. He's got 7 wounds. He's tough 5. He has all the things regular Primaris chaplains have, and he's super fast. And because he's on a bike, he will keep up with any unit that you are running, which is great. Your only downside with him, and it's just it can be worked around. Just something to be aware of is he's on a bike. Bikes cannot move through breachable things, and ruins are, generally speaking, one of the most popular terrain types for 40k, and he can't go through ruins, so he has to go around. So just something to keep in mind. But other than that, and that's a pretty minor thing, because he's got such great speed, you can advance him. He gets an auto 6 inches, so that's 20 inches, which is really far. He should be able to get around any piece of terrain that is in his way.
Yeah, I mean, and his additional base size is also critical to getting that bubble
extra aura
out further.
Yep.
So it's really huge. In an emergency, if you get rights of battle or rights of him, he can also make sure that he's capturing objectives or projecting that bubble out to whomever he needs to. He's just a great all around. He can also tie up a lot of different units because of that base size. If you need to, you're going to sacrifice him to make sure that you're blocking maybe an objective or something to that effect, so that another unit can have that. He's great for that. He's just a great unit. The ruins is a problem, but you're not going to likely see a full board of ruins.
Yeah.
It's usually going to be some interchange, so you'll have some workarounds on that.
Yep. All right. So that brings us to another classic, the Chaplain in Terminator armor.
All right. So I'm going to say it. The old metal model is way better than the new one, in my opinion.
100% agree. I love the OG. And that's why I used his image for our Chaplain, because that's the Terminator Chaplain model I've had. I've had him for years. He's metal, and I love it. And I was really excited when they're like, yeah, like when Commanding Oratory came out. I was like, sweet. I was like, he can deep strike and chant a litany. That is awesome. And I've tried to make him work. And honestly, for the points, Grimaldus is just straight up better. The only thing that he has that is that deep strike and a 2+ save and an extra wound, and it's just not enough. If you're deep striking him, you're losing a full turn of litanies, which kind of sucks. So, and then you're going to pay 2 CP to cast one when he drops. So, aside for some very niche uses, unfortunately, he's probably going to be C tier for me.
I would agree with that. He's slow, so he's not going to walk as fast as your other things are, and that's one of the critical things with our HQs. They have to keep up with our advancing units. Terminators are going to be an exception. They're slow, but we're often going to be devout pushing them up the board, and they're not going to be in range anymore. So,
Yep.
Deep Strike is that niche.
Yep.
But you really
Exactly.
don't want to blow all your CP right away on that.
Right. Jeremy asks, would you consider the Chaplain on a bike as a warlord with the trait to gain OBSEC? Absolutely. Even if he's not your warlord, Hero of the Chapter is a great take on him as well. There are many great warlord traits that you can give him. Rights of War is one. Frontline Commander is another, which is awesome, especially given he's going to be with your forward troops, getting +1 to advance and charge with your jump pack. Vanguard Veterans or even your Terminators are going to be great. So yeah.
And putting warlord trait or warlord on your most durable unit is not a bad choice.
Tough 5 wounds, 7 wounds, like we said. So he's gonna be tough to bring down. All right, so that brings us to our generic Firstborn Chaplain.
All right, so the Chaplain is worse in every way, unless you take a jump pack.
Yeah.
So,
which is how I'd run him, and that's why I use the picture of the dude with the jump pack, because if you're gonna take a Firstborn Chaplain, this is the way to go with a jump pack. He gains the fly keyword, which mitigates that issue that the biker chaplain has with ruins, and allows him to keep up with his Vanguard vets and just fly over whatever's in his way. He's a good bit cheaper. I think he's about 9 or 10 points cheaper than the chaplain on a bike, so you can save some points if you need to. He's not as durable, obviously, but as long as you're keeping him safe nearby units, I think he's a great take. Probably A+ tier for me.
Yeah, he's not quite S. He does all of the things that you essentially really need for the chaplain on bike. He's almost as fast. He doesn't have the problem that the runes have, but he does have a much smaller base, so you have to account for that. Much less durable with 4 toughness, 1 less wound, or sorry, 2 less wounds. Does have 1 less attack because he's not Primaris. So yeah, those are things you have to account for. He's not as good a take having that warlord because of that durability issue, but he's still mobile. If you're taking a lot of Vanguard veterans, he's a great take with them, so he can go exactly where they're going to go, where that potentially that smaller base is beneficial. Squeezing into different runes or small spaces. So that is definitely something that is beneficial for him. I don't like the fact that he is 130 points rather than 140 points, because for that the 10 more points, you can just take the chaplain. But that's just something to think about. But he's very good for what he does. He projects ahead of the board. Those litanies, those are what you take him for. He's not going to knock anything over in close combat, but those litanies are great to keep up with your advanced units.
Yep. All right, so that brings us to Techmarines, and as we said at the beginning of the stream, in case you missed it, Techmarines is one of those units we decided to combine together. I know Firstborn and Primaris have different stat lines and different gear, but other than that, they play the same on the table. Unlike the chaplains and the captains, where they have different mobility stats and things like that, the Techmarines essentially play the same on the table. And for me, solid B.
I would agree with that. They are going to be a unit that you're not going to see on the board too terribly often because of what they buff. You're going to be looking at some vehicles. Dreadnoughts.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you're going to run a Dreadnought heavy list, they're worth taking. But beyond that, we just don't. Vehicles aren't good enough right now to really warrant them taking them a lot, which is unfortunate because they're good little units. You get a lot of value as far as like the guns that they bring and things like that. Especially the Primaris Techmarine with that forge bolter is really nice. But they just, unless you're running lots of dreadnoughts, probably not going to see too many of them on the table. All right,
Yep.
that brings us to the Techmarines Servitors, which for me
Terrible.
are a fat D. There's just no reason to take them over Cenobites. Cenobites are better in every way. They're cheaper. They have the same crap stat line. Yeah, these guys can take weapons, but am I really going to spend points for a heavy bolter or a multi-melta on a dude with a 5+ ballistic skill? No. So,
No.
D tier. They're not completely unusable. I guess if you really wanted to run
Yes,
them.
they are.
So would you put them in F tier then?
I would never ever take servitors.
Okay.
Ever. Ever, ever.
Fair enough. I probably wouldn't either. I'm gonna take Cenobites instead. So yeah, well, sorry, Servitors, you're down there in the bottom.
Trash.
Trash. Moving on. Something definitely better than Servitors. Intercessor Squad. These are the standard original OG Intercessors. Can Intercessors be called OG? I don't know.
Oh, I don't know.
Too soon?
You might offend
Too
some
soon for
people
that?
too soon. All
So,
right. Well, honestly, they're a good solid unit.
mhm.
They hold objectives well. I wouldn't probably advance them up the board, well, but you could. But we have a brand new unit that does that for us.
Yep.
They're a good, solid, average unit. They sit in the sea.
Yeah.
We don't have the buffs to really, with our chapter tactics, to really make them great. Something like the Imperial Fist or the Crimson Fist to really buff those bolt rifles. So
Yeah.
they're just average for us. We don't get really much out of taking them.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. If you're gonna take them, autobolt rifles is the way to go. It's mathematically better than all the other choices, especially given that we don't get any kind of buffs to them like other chapters, like especially the Imperial Fists and their successors, other successors, lesser chapters. Um, so yeah, I would agree. Which brings us to the reason why they're probably now C tier is the Assault Intercessor Squad.
So these guys are pretty good. So they're pretty good. I won't lie. So if you're taking troops, you're likely taking these.
Yeah.
So now, as far as a troop goes, these rating them is a little bit tougher because most of our lists do well without troops. We want to be as aggressive as we can on the board, taking some of those harder hitting units. But there is some lists out there that have been successful with troops on them, and they feature assault intercessors. They're very well rounded. They have great pistols that can, with those minus 1 AP.
18-inch range too, which is insane for a pistol. It's only 6 inches less than bolters and assault and auto bolt rifles. So, really good pistol for a troop's choice. And in certain circumstances, obviously, most of the time you're going to use things like Emperor's Will stratagem on something harder hitting. But if those harder hitting units don't need it, or are already engaged, and you want to scurry your assault intercessors across the board to do something, they can still shoot their pistols and charge with that. So yeah.
Yeah. I would say they're a good solid B.
Yep.
B plus.
Yeah. I would agree.
They fit the Crusader
Yep.
aesthetic really well.
Yep. Yeah. If nothing else, they harken back to the days of yore with Crusader squads, where they were, where they were doing, loads of bolt pistol and chainsword guys charging across the field. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Heavy intercessors.
Okay. Let's see here. All right. Our heavy intercessors are
And I want
Not
to
really
know,
fitting our.
quick question for you. We, of course, have our Black Templar specific units to talk about at some point. Do we want to hit those up at the end? Or do we
Yeah,
want to?
that's
Yeah,
what I think.
that's what I was thinking too. So stay tuned.
Yep. So the
Michael
heavy
says
intercessors.
10 Assault Intercessors fighting twice, hitting at strength 5 next to Helber can put in work. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, they did.
That is pretty scary. And if you have Grimaldus nearby too, that will also be pretty scary. Exploding sixes on there. So anyway, Bob, heavy Intercessors.
Okay, I don't like them. I know that on paper they are potentially really kind of dangerous and hard to kill, but that was before the Drukari came out, and now Gravis is kind of just like, okay, whatever.
Yeah,
So between
they're
Poison
expensive.
and Dark Lances, they're way too expensive for what you get.
Yeah,
Way too expensive. Maybe in another chapter they would be better, but we want to advance.
right.
We want board control, and these guys are slow.
Hmm.
Sure, they have that additional toughness in that range, but we have a better objective sitting troop that we're going to get to just here in just a moment than these guys.
Yep.
Yeah, they do have some stratagem support where they can reduce the amount of damage that they take, but honestly, I'm not taking them.
Mm-mm. I'm not either. I think they're D tier for me.
Yeah, for Black Templars, we will never take them.
Yeah, there's too many other good troops that are better and cheaper. All right. One of Bob's favorite troop choices, the Infiltrator Squad. Why don't you fanboy about Infiltrators, Bob?
All right, so for fans of the channel and or our Discord, they know that I've been kind of talking about these guys for quite a while. So that kind of gives me a little bit of an offshoot. If you're not part of our Discord channel, we will post the link to that in the description here once we're done, so you can join that. A lot of information goes on in the Discord that we can't keep up with in videos. So, as the meta changes, we often are shifting lists and advice as we go on that. But Infiltrators, they are an absolute amazing unit. So there's stipulations to this. So what 9th edition is about is board control. That's what we are best for. We don't knock anything over. So we don't have the additional close combat traits like the Blood Angels or the Space Wolves or White Scars to kill things in close combat. But what makes us really good is our ability to get across the board, the ability to use the stratagems to get into close combat when we shouldn't be able to. We have durability via the 5+ mortal wound, feel no pains, and these guys just fit right into that board control. So you get that 12-inch ability to block our deep strikes, or even moving onto the board. So they are a little bit expensive. So the standard bog unit is going to be 120 points. But what really takes them over the top is if you have the Helix Gauntlet. So you take a unit that's Primaris, is typically going to be used at ranged, sitting on maybe a mid-board objective or your home objective. It's going to block those deep strikes that within 12 inches. You can see concealed position, so you can get them up the board if you need to and get those early scored points. But the Helix Gauntlet allows you to ignore the first saving throw that's failed against them. So that's a huge durability increase, because often you're not really going to be seeing a lot of attention directed their way with the Black Templars, because we're going to have Vanguard Veterans, we're going to have Terminators, we're going to have all these units just like blowing into their face, and they're going to direct guns at the Infiltrator Squad? I mean, maybe. And if they do get those incidental shots, they are going to be ignoring that first one. You also have the smoke screen keyword, so they can get -1 to hit. and they can be transhumaned. So if you really need them to stick around on the board, there ain't no way your opponent's going to be killing them without huge amounts of firepower being put in them. But as I mentioned, they are expensive, so I don't suggest taking more than one, maybe two in the right list. So if you're taking a troops unit, this is a great start. Taking one of those infiltrators, being that getting that deny on the board, so your opponent can't get anywhere near your objective at home or try any of those shenanigans coming on your board edge. So these guys are great. They're not going to kill anything, but board control, you don't get much better than this.
Yeah, I mean, they don't need to kill anything. The main purpose of most of the time your troops is to sit on an objective and score you points, which is going to win you games. So I have come around a little bit. They guys tease me on the Discord server about infiltrators. So when 8th edition came out, I was like, they're too expensive. Incursors are flat out better. There's no way I'm running in infiltrators. And when ninth was in first started, and we got our new codex, I was like, nope, Incursors are still better. Incursors are still better. And then I actually looked at their data sheet, and the Helix Gauntlet change is nice. It's a much better, um, than sort of like the old school Apothecary rules that it had. Uh, and yeah, they are more expensive, and no, they stink at close combat, just like you know, uh, a lot of other troops. But because that was the one thing, like the Incursors, I was like, yeah, they got AP1 minus knives, like that's awesome. But the utility of the infiltrators is excellent, like Bob said. All those things. If you really need them to survive, we actually discussed this on the Black Templar Facebook group the other day. If you really need them to survive, you can spend a couple CP and smokescreen them for a -1 to hit, transhuman them to make them, only wound on 4s, and then they ignore the first one with the Helix Gauntlet. So that is going to keep this unit alive, and that could be the difference in your game. I mean, that could be a 10 or maybe even 15-point swing um, in your game, because if you think about it, if they're on an objective and your opponent needs to shoot them off so that they can control more objectives than you, that's a 10-point swing right there. Because you will gain 5 for, controlling it, and they will not get that extra 5. So it is, that's big. That can win you the game. So, would I always recommend doing that? Not necessarily. But in the crucial moment, if it's coming down to it, down to the wire, this unit's going to stay alive on an objective a lot better than anybody else. So they're A tier for me, surprisingly. And I think Bob would probably agree.
Yep, they're A tier. I would even say A plus. I was debating on them. Really, they're almost S tier for
But you
me.
don't want to spam them. They're too
But they're
expensive to do that. One
yeah,
squad is really all
yeah,
I'd take. So,
yeah, and that's what keeps them from the S tier for me.
which brings us to their brothers, the Incursors. So Incursors, for me, they're not as good as Infiltrators, unfortunately. As much as I like, dual knife wielding melee guys, um, but I still think they're pretty decent. They have the smokescreen keyword as well. They are Primaris, so they can be transhumaned as well. They don't have the Helix Gauntlet, but they can take a Haywire Mine, where you can cause D3 mortal wounds or 3 mortal wounds if it's a vehicle when something charges them on a 2-up, which is much better than their old rule. The old Haywire was pretty much useless. Now it's, you get to choose when it goes off, and it stays with the unit, which is nice. They do not take penalties to shooting of any kind, either from cover or for uh, ballistic skill modifiers. But that being said, their shooting is nothing to write home about. They're just essentially bolt guns, um, stat line wise, and they do have some okay melee, um, but assault intercessors are just better. So
Yeah,
for me, they're probably B or C tier.
So I really don't like them as much as the assault intercessors for just being the assault aspect of them. They do have the ability to conceal position, which is kind of nice.
Yep.
But ultimately, they don't deny that deep strike. They don't have the utility of the infiltrators. I would agree with the C.
Yeah, unfortunately. It pains me to put them there, but there's better options. I haven't run them really, except maybe once since 9th started, and that was like early on in 9th. So, moving on. The tactical squad. Not much to talk about here. F tier. Zero reason. We are Black Templars. We have Crusader squads. There is zero reason to ever run a tactical squad. Ever. They hold no benefit over Crusader squads. They're more expensive. They don't have the options that they do. Not worth it.
Nope. Yep, they stay in there.
Yep. Company champion.
All right.
Moving into the
So,
elites.
company champion. Interesting option for you. It's takes up a character slot, which, not an HQ one, but it's in the elite slot where, we would ideally want to have the Emperor's champion, but it's not as good as it used to be in 8th edition. There really is no reason for us to really take this. We have other options that are characters in this slot that give a little bit more of a bonus in utility for that. With the negatives of the changes.
He's basically a poor man's Emperor's champion, and if I'm gonna take a character killer unit, I'm just gonna take the Emperor's champion because he's way better at it. So for me, this guy is might even be F tier, certainly D tier.
Yeah, I would put him in D tier because he's not.
He's not bad.
If you have an extra,
he's just not useful for us.
Yeah, I mean, he's cheap. I believe it's 55 points. So if you have 55 points laying around, and you don't have any fast attack slots to take an attack bite, he's useful. But yeah, he's D.
DBZ asks, would you normally run 2 units for backfield stuff?
Yes.
And
I personally do.
We'll get to that in a few minutes. Yes. You'll want something like infiltrators potentially, and then one of your harder hitting units, maybe like Grav Devastators or something like that. And we'll talk about them in a little bit. So moving on, scouts, who are now elites for reasons unknown.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I know there's a lot of people that don't like the whole scouts as troops and taking them as units by themselves, with the Black Templar and aesthetic. But they were a good little unit, but they went up dramatically in points.
Yeah,
I think it's 70 points to take the base unit.
14 points a model. No reason to take these guys at that points level, especially with regular Marines getting 1 wound or an extra wound and a better armor save. Like, just no, there's no reason for when these guys were 11 points a model. That was and troops, that was much different. But unfortunately, I can't see myself ever running them now the way they're currently, which is a shame because I had literally just finished painting up my my scout squads when they nerfed them. So for me, they're probably F tier.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but yes.
So now for something
I kind of like.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say I kind of like their aesthetic online. We got some stratagem support, but their stat line is kind of just,
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, now for something more positive, Apothecaries. Again, this is a unit we combined the Primaris and the Firstborn because they are functionally the same on the tabletop. The only difference that you might encounter is that the regular Apothecary has Command Squad, versus the Primaris Apothecary does not. So you could take the regular Apothecary if there were company veterans in the list for free, or for not free, but for no slot, which is nice. But it's not something that really sets them apart enough play-wise on the tabletop to warrant a different unit. But without a doubt, Apothecaries are S tier for me.
Yep.
They are ridiculously good, giving a feel no pain aura, being able to heal units, and then especially the Chief Apothecary with the Selfless Healer Warlord trait is just amazing. It's nearly an auto include if you're running large units of expensive models like Terminators. Yeah, my Apothecary has been the bane of my playgroup's existence. So absolutely S tier.
Yeah, and there really isn't much else to take or comment on that. But it's, bringing back models that have died is a great boon.
Yep.
So,
All right, so another set of units that we combined, the Ancients. There are 4 different types of Ancients. They're all really just a different flavor. They have some slightly different war gear, slightly different stat lines. The Blade Guard buffs Blade Guard guys in addition to everything else he does. And the Terminator guy can deep strike. But other than that, they all serve the same function. And right now, they just don't do enough. They mainly function when things die. And even then, it's not even a guarantee. Which for me, we don't want our things dying. So triggering on stuff dying is not something you really want to play around, especially as a melee army.
yeah, everything that we're doing is making sure that our stuff isn't dying.
Yeah.
By taking invulnerable saves with storm shields, or we talked about
Apothecaries,
the
the Feel No
infiltrators.
Pains, Divine Protection, those things. I think there can be a case made where you take the upgrade, the Chapter Ancient, because they can give +1 to hit to a unit in melee. I think it'd be fun to have Terminators hitting on 2s with Thunderhammers. I think that seems amusing to me, but I've never been able to fit it into a list and be satisfied with the remainder of the list because it's like nearly 100 points, and it's like I could just take more of something else that kills stuff. For me, they're probably D tier, maybe C
Yeah,
tier.
I would put them in D tier, and the only reason why I would put them in the D tier over the F tier is because some of the relic and command abilities that they potentially could take, but really that's going to be really rare list that's going to be beneficial.
Yep. All right. Speaking of more bad units, veteran intercessors. These guys are F tier for me. They don't
F
bring
plus.
F plus. They're better than the other things in F tier, but there's literally no reason to take them over assault intercessors. They are 3 points per model more than assault intercessors. 2 or 3 points, I can't remember exactly. And for that, you get +1 attack and +1 leadership, and that's just not worth it. They don't get the fight again stratagem, and they aren't troops. So you're taking up a valuable elite slot when you should be taking Vanguard Vets or something like that. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, and they're more expensive. So
yeah,
yeah,
22.
your
So 3
analysis is
points
pretty
more.
right on. So they're expensive. They take up elite slots, and they don't really contribute much extra to the board with their Astartes chainswords. There can be some niche uses with Helbricht with them, but yeah, I don't think it's worthwhile at those points.
Nathan asks, does taking a Chief Apothecary negate the need for Litany of Divine Protection? 5+ Feel No Pain from the Litany versus always on 6+ Feel No Pain from the Apothecary. For me, No. Saving your wounds that were failed saves on a 5+, you're going to save double the number of wounds on a 5+ than you are in a 6+. And you may not have your unit that you put because the divine protection is not an aura, you can put it on Vanguard vet squads who are then going to fly away. That'll be much too fast for the apothecary to keep up with. So definitely not for me. I think it depends on your list. If you're not running a lot of jump pack Vanguard vets, maybe you're running mostly Primaris or something like that. You may be able to get away with it, but I would still probably recommend taking it. What do you think?
I'm going to be kind of a little bit of a counterpoint. I agree if you are got some advanced Vanguard veterans or whatever else that's advancing up the board, having that chaplain using the Litany of Divine Protection is the way to go. But if they're all grouped up and you're doing the overlap aura strategy with our troops, the apothecary should be enough for you, because the other litany tree is really good. Get the exhortation of rage and canticles of hate. That bodes well. And the other point is you can have apothecary and another chaplain in a different place. So maybe you have some overlapping auras for your Terminators and maybe Blade Guard veterans or Eradicators or whatever is in that area, and you can still have that litany on the other side of the board. So it really just depends on your list and how you want to build it and the strategy you're going for. But I don't necessarily think you have to have the litany if you have the apothecary, but it really is going to depend on your list.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Blade Guard veterans.
These guys look awesome.
Yep.
Just because of that, they get A.
They definitely look awesome. I love these guys. I feel like when they came out with Indomitus, I was like, they made them for us. Look at those Black Templars that they painted blue.
And of course, someone with some mad Photoshop skills immediately turned them black.
Of course,
so.
Yeah, immediately.
But on the tabletop, they're an amazing unit. Honestly, it's one of the best tar pit units that we have.
Mm-hmm.
They are the bane of Mortarian's existence.
Yep.
So, especially if they have Feel No Pain backup or an apothecary rolling around with them, Morty's going to be sitting in combat with those Blade Guard the whole game, and you're going to laugh all the way down the street as they just spent 500 points on Morty.
You're gonna make him fall back. Is what you're gonna do if he's in combat with them. But yeah, these guys are great. And if you are dedicated to running Primaris only, you're gonna want to run probably 2 to 3 squads of these guys, simply because they are going to be your best close combat unit. I'd say the only negative really that these guys have is 6-man maximum. If we could take them in 10-man, man, that'd be really great. So they'd be just about on par with Terminators. A slightly less damage output, but they still have mastercrafted power swords, which is awesome. So yeah, definitely an A tier unit.
Yeah, they can take the place of your Terminators easily. They're cheaper than a Terminator.
Don't hit quite as hard without having strength 8. But they have a pip better of AP and 1 less damage. But they do have more attacks. They have 3 base versus 2. So they're going to get more attacks, which is nice. That helps make up for that a little bit.
Yeah, and they also have a pistol, which
faster.
Terminators do not.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. All right.
So great unit.
Company vets.
I also love company vets. So since 9th edition came out, I've been talking about them. They've been in many of my lists. They are very adaptable. Very, very adaptable. Snipers are not really common out there, but there's enough lists out there that they are reasonably decent in protecting your your HQs if you have some HQs in your overlapping auras. And that aura also can be buffed with things like, forgive me, the litany of having a brain fart, of course.
Which one?
The litany that extends auras.
Oh, Fervent Acclamation.
Acclamation. Litany of Acclamation. So, so I mean, they can give you some protection to your HQs, but really why I take them is because they're cheap and they can take really a whole lot of different weaponry and do nearly as much damage as something as a Blade Guard, but they're not as durable. So you can give them Storm Shields, you can give them Lightning Claws or Power Fists or whatever you really want to do with them. And you can take them as small as a 2-man squad, which is really handy. You know, just a little bit of oomph, you know, to protect
especially in a drop pod. If you're dropping in a drop pod of something, you can use them to fill up the other slots, which is nice because they're less than 5-man. They're 2 to 5. So yeah, I would probably say we're thinking A tier, right?
Yep. I would put them in A tier. And they're really kind of handy as a screening unit because ideally what's going to happen is if, you know, your HQs are walking around with your Apothecary and such with Terminators typically, and those Terminators are going to eventually advance out of range of those HQs. So you want to have something still within range that you can buff.
Yeah.
That will contribute to your battle plan. Then you can use them to screen your HQs, or maybe they send them off to an opportune area of the board as well. So they're kind of handy.
Yep. Indeed. All right. So, one of our favorites, Vanguard Veterans.
Where's my meme?
Without a doubt, they are S tier. These are one of, if not the best unit in the Codex for us. They are fast, they hit hard, they're durable, they are scary. They have good stratagem support, even though they're not Primaris. They have the Melt-A-Bomb keyword, which means that, you know, if you go up against anything that's a vehicle, you can sacrifice one of the chainsword guys. We usually run chainsword guys, but or just, you know, one of the not Thunderhammer guys, to make a single attack roll, and if it hits, D3 mortal wounds. So really good there. They also have Hammer of Wrath to hit harder infantry with. You know, against Marine equivalents, you're looking at a 50% chance for every dude that got into base to base to deal a mortal wound, which is really good. So they have good strats. They have it all. The only thing they don't have is transhuman. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, that's disappointing, but they're so good. They're so good.
Yep. Run them up the board. Don't destruct them.
Not expensive.
So.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said run them up the board. Don't deep strike them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and they get discounts on pretty much all their equipment. So, I mean,
12
why
would
you not take them?
Yes, please. Even with the quote-unquote nerf to Thunderhammers, for 12 points, I mean, you are probably going to have these guys in Assault Doctrine at least the first turn anyway with the Crusader Helm, so they're going to be AP -3 anyway, which will either take care of most people's armor or be enough to trigger their invul save anyway. So, yeah. Not too much we can say that is bad about veteran squads because there is nothing bad about them.
there isn't. It kind of, I saw a post on one of the Black Templars Facebook posts not too long ago, and I won't name the person, but that person was like, "Oh, the Vanguard veterans aren't bad," and I'm like, "What?" I literally like fell out of my chair, and I was like, "Are you kidding me? What?"
Yeah.
If you're not taking at least one unit of Vanguard veterans in your squad, really should be rethinking your list.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's arguments to be said that 30 are even
oh my gosh.
a positive thing, but that's for another video for another day.
Peter says the Melta Bomb is 2d3 mortal wounds. Ah, yes, thank you for correcting me on that. It is 2d3 mortal wounds, which is ridiculous. So yeah, which is great. And that's the thing too, is don't forget stuff like that. My last game where I played with them, I charged into a Invictor, and had I remembered to use that strat, I probably would have killed it, because I think it had like 2 wounds left. I think it had 2 wounds left. So yeah, I probably would have killed it, because hitting on 3s, re-rolls to wound or to hit, excuse me, from my nearby Chaplain, 88% chance to hit for 2d3 mortal wounds, which is ridiculous. Anyway, Stern Guard, their other shooty cousins. How do you feel about these guys?
So the Stern Guard they're okay.
I want
They're
to like them,
in a,
but I
yeah.
can't justify them in a list, really. We just don't. I think they'd be good in Imperial Fists, where you get the exploding bolters, because they do have special issue bolt guns, so they do count for that. But for us, I can't find a spot where they will work well for Black Templars. So for me, they're probably C tier.
I would agree with that. They have niche abilities in a drop pod list. You know, again, we bring up drop pods as an option, but other than that, they're really not going to see a whole lot of play because we have Devastators.
Yep.
Honestly,
Yep, exactly. All right. The only thing about Stern Guard that appeals to me is, I think it'd be fun to put them in a drop pod with 2 heavy flamers, because they're the only unit that can take heavy flamers. But for the points, I probably just run an Invictor, which has got the same 2d6 heavy flamer shots. So yeah. So that brings us to one of the newer characters, the Judiciar. And if you had asked me when the 9th edition started what this guy was ranked, I probably would have said A tier. But since they took away the fly keyword from the Impulsors, and that combo is not quite as good as it once was, um, you know, I think he's dropped a good bit.
yeah, that additional drop in range is unfortunate.
And he lost 3 inches
Comboing,
off of his ability, which is unfortunate. So
that really makes it tough to get that in range.
yeah, I think for me, I think he's probably B tier, simply because his ability is really powerful, and he's decent in close combat. Um, but you're not gonna see a lot of use for him. The main use for him is still the Impulsor combo, or as helping a countercharge unit. Um, but I just have trouble fitting him into my list.
I will say he does have some additional usage now that Drukhari Codex is out.
Mm-hmm.
You want to stay ahead of the game meta wise. If you are not familiar, Drukhari have numerous ways of making your units strike last, or versus you or them striking first is the other thing. So
Yeah.
that unfortunately could be really bad for us,
Yeah.
especially with how much damage that they can potentially put out in close combat. So he could be potentially a way to mitigate that. But again, he's in the elite slot. His range is a little bit shorter, but that might be a way to get a key unit, making sure that they're striking first. So
Yeah. So I think if it weren't for Drukhari and all the other, fights last, fights first stuff that's coming out, he probably would be in C tier, but I think B tier is a good spot for him. He's also something to consider for him if you do decide to run one, is spending the command point to give him Oathkeeper, because it will allow him to heroically intervene from further away and make sure that you get to use his ability. All right, so that brings us to Reavers.
Yay.
For me, Reavers are not a good unit. They have good strats, but the unit themselves is just bad. I think the points are better spent elsewhere. I know Bob has a different opinion, so we'll let Bob give his opinion, and then we'll decide where we're going to put these guys.
Okay, so stratagem support is why you're taking them. We talked about them with the Phobos or the Reaver Lieutenant. So they're in the elite slot, which is also a competitive slot for our units. But when you have a little bit more playroom with these guys. So right now, with the land of Dark Angels and Death Guard, who are going to be sitting on an objective and nearly impossible to take off of those objectives, you have to have a way to deny it somehow, some way. And these guys, for 100 points, which is only slightly more expensive than the Reaver Lieutenant is, you can deep strike in or outflank depending on your choice there. And you have twice as many wounds as that lieutenant has. Many more attacks, many more shots with their bolt pistol. You can transhuman them just like normal. Again, more durability, the key. My 3 tenants I put out on the videos, the 3 tenants, they're more durable than the lieutenant is. They have more damage capability. 3 tenant. And they have utility. So, in my opinion, they're much better than the lieutenant. Would I take more than 1 unit? No, absolutely not. They are taken solely to make sure that you are denying an objective. But models are awesome looking, in my opinion. They do have utility in the meta right now. So that's just something that I think you need to think about when you're taking your list. I honestly am really kind of debating putting them in my tournament list. I told that to Alex before we started the stream, and he was like, "No, Bob, no." And I'm like, "Just watch. I'm going to make a meta."
We need to stage it. We need to stage an intervention for Bob. So a Reaver intervention.
You were saying infiltrators were bad, and then I'm like, "Oh, they're good. They're good." And then just wait.
But Reavers aren't troops. And I mean, yeah, so they're only 100 points, but they do take up a precious elite slot. And yes, they can deep strike. Here's the problem: is both of the 2 strats that are so good for them, which is Shock and Awe and Terror Troops. One's got a range of 3 inches. One's got a range of 6 inches. So neither one of them, even with Devout Push, can be used when they drop, which means they're standing there in the open for a whole turn, doing nothing except shooting maybe some strength 4 AP2 pistols. Why their pistols got AP2 and their knives didn't, I'll never know. But yeah, I think they're better than they used to be because of those strats. In the 8th edition, they were garbage. They would have been F tier for sure. I wouldn't put them above C tier, though, in my opinion. What is your thought, Bob?
No. They're a C tier.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
I was going to get mad if you were going to be like, they're D tier. I'm like, no.
Well,
Unacceptable.
originally our list was just A through D, and I decided to add F because like there are some units that are bad and not usually worth taking, at least for Black Templars, and then there's units that are just so awful they should never see the table right now at all. And that's why I added F tier. So Reavers get to stay at C tier by virtue of the fact that I added a tier. So they're not in the worst category. The DBEZ says they look so cool, though. They do look cool, which is another reason why it's sad. I kind of like the skull helms, honestly. They're pretty neat to me. Um, uh, so much so that I've used them on some of my chaplains, because why not? All right, so moving on, more Gravis, aggressors. Where are you on aggressors?
I think they fit right there in the C tier
Hmm.
with as an average unit. They were a lot better with the double shooting and advance and shoot. I feel like Games Workshop took a heavy-handed knee jerk on that,
Yep.
knocking them back down to prevent certain
Certain abuse.
chapters. Yeah, but it's unfortunate because they were a cool unit and they kind of fulfilled a really good anti-horde option for us. There is still, some fringe usage for them with their Flamestorm gauntlets with pretty much auto hit with those,
Yeah.
and you can do a pretty good amount of damage with their between that and their basically power fists equivalent. But they are a little bit expensive for what they do. You almost want to take your Terminators instead of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I would probably almost always, despite the slightly lower output in shooting, that regular most people call them tactical Terminators, but just the regular Terminator squad has, simply because they're more durable. They get that 5+ invulnerable save, and they have the ability to deep strike, and they have longer range on their guns. Their storm bolters are 24 inches versus 18 on their auto bolt storm. So yeah. Speaking of Terminators, Terminator Assault Squad. I don't think there's any doubt that these guys are not S tier.
I would agree. They Ninth edition has really upped their game with them, getting that additional wound. Really
Yeah.
kind of took them over the top,
Yep.
and comboing them with our ability to buff them with our litanies and apothecaries. So they do take a little bit of a buffing to really making sure that they're S tier. Without a buff, I would say that they're probably A, but we're not often taking a list without those buffing
Yep.
pieces.
Yep.
So
Plus the change to storm shields also really helped them out a lot. I remember when they first announced that, and there was a lot of question, is that better? Is that worse? Is it a side grade? What's going on? And I think some people initially lamented that it was a nerf, losing the 3++. But honestly, I have discovered that it is a significant buff. Having essentially a 1+ armor save for these guys and still getting a 4++ is great. AP -2, you're still saving on, and there's a lot of AP -2. You're still saving on 3s, which is amazing. And just being able to have the core is essential to these guys. Being able to buff them. They also have a good stratagem in Fury the First, which you can negate their Thunderhammer. -1 to hit. We would absolutely recommend always taking all Thunderhammers and Storm Shields. Lightning Claws are unfortunately just not worth it for them. They're a little too fragile. So if you're gonna run them, you definitely want hammers. And unit size is typically 8 to 10 for us. All right.
Yeah. You want
So
to be able to take them in larger units.
yeah. And that's for several reasons. Durability, one, because they are going to get shot. They are going to get focused on, and you want to have enough guys that, one, they'll survive that, but also you'll have enough guys that once you survive that, you can heal them back with your apothecary, and that they'll do enough damage when they hit your opponent. So yeah. Regular Terminators, not quite as good as Assault Terminators. I think they're actually a couple notches down, simply because they're just not as durable. 5+ is, um, it may not seem like it, but 5+ is pretty significantly worse than 4+. And they don't have the 1+ armor save,
Yeah.
which kind of sucks. They also are packing Storm Bolters. Power Fists are good. Nothing wrong with the Power Fists. They also can take Chain Fists, which are nice if you are facing lots of vehicles all the time. But the Storm Bolters just aren't. It's a lot of shots, but there's no AP. They just don't. Again, they don't synergize enough well with us to really make those Storm Bolters. If they were like even AP -1, then they'd probably be better.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where would you rate them, Bob?
I probably would put them in the B slot myself. They're good enough stat wise that they warrant that rating. But like you mentioned, they just don't have the durability that you need for us to be successful.
Yeah,
Honestly.
yeah. And I think the same is going to be said for Relic Terminators. They are slightly more expensive than regular Terminators for some reason. I don't know why. This is the combined data sheet that used to be Tartaros and Cataphracti Terminators, which both had unique pluses and minuses to taking them, and they combined them together into one sheet where they just have the standard Terminator stat line and abilities and just some different weaponry. I think the only reason that I would take Relic Terminators is if I wanted to run Storm Bolters and a Lightning Claw, because that is unique to them. And it's an interesting loadout. I think it's different enough from Power Fists that that it could be worth running, especially if you really like the look of them and you're not going to take Assault Terminators. I'd probably put them in the same spot, B tier.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So moving on, another former favorite unit of mine, which I now lament are very bad. Centurion Assault Squad. Um, Losing core and getting the points hike. They did get a slight points drop when the 9th edition codex came out, but they got a massive points hike for when 9th started, and they lost core, just didn't get core. They never had it to begin with. So both of which are massive, massive nerfs for these poor guys. And since they don't have an invulnerable save, they can't benefit from something like the Aurelian Shroud for us. And yeah, I'm sad because I spent hours converting these guys to not be stumpy looking. And I never got to paint them before they got nerfed. I at least finished converting them. I probably will put them in D tier simply because they have great firepower, and when they hit something, it's probably going to disappear because they have a really great. Their siege drills are amazing, um, but yeah, they are suffering a lot because of points and not having core, and they're slow, which isn't as bad
Yeah.
because Terminators have the same speed, but Terminators have the durability to walk and be slow. Centurions do not. They are tough 5, which is nice, and a 2+ save, but no invul hurts them a lot. So I think they're D tier, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would agree. They used to be one of those units that were relatively cheap for what they did. You could buff them, make sure that they were able to get across the board, whether it be using Aurelian Shroud or our litanies.
Mm-hmm.
But with that huge point increase and the loss of core, so now you can't buff them. They can't. They don't warrant being taken in the battle.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. All right, Invictor Tactical Warsuit. This guy has been kind of up and down. He was amazing in 8th edition, and got sort of side grade nerfed a little bit in 9th because Dreadnoughts really wasn't so much that they got nerfed, it's more that Dreadnoughts got buffed, and they're not a Dreadnought. But yeah, I think Invictors bring a lot to the table and are still an A tier unit. What do you think, Bob?
I like them a lot, but I am going to slightly disagree with them, as the application of dreadnoughts are typically a little bit more usable, specifically the Redemptor.
He is fragile.
They are cheaper.
Yeah.
He's fragile.
Yeah. Tough
So
6 is no bueno. And not having that
it's
Duty Eternal.
yeah, it's harder to keep them on the board, but they have similar damage output, and you can deploy them up the field, which is a bonus. And they didn't get too much of a points hike, so that's awesome. And both of their Flamestorm, the
Incendium Cannon.
Incendium Cannon and their Iron Hail autocannon are both the same points now, so that's also good. So I would put them, honestly, myself in B tier, simply because of their durability, but they do have things going for them. Still useful, just not always as useful as a dreadnought, depending on what you need it for. So I'll give you the benefit on selecting that one.
Yeah, they I would agree with that. Their fragility sort of takes them down a peg. But they are cheap. They're a good distraction Carnifex. I think they're what I would like to call a popcorn unit, where they're something that's cheap enough that if it dies because your opponent focused it down, that's fine. But dangerous enough that your opponent has to deal with it, because if you don't, it's just gonna die. It's gonna wreak havoc in their lines. So now into dreadnoughts proper, starting with the basic dreadnought.
So it does have Duty Eternal, which is nice, but it doesn't have the huge amounts of weaponry that you can take on some of the other things. It's basically a run-of-the-mill, hey, you want to get a bunch of dreadnoughts on the field, which are high toughness, and potentially get them in close combat while shooting on the way. So they're not bad. They're, I would say, a C+ unit. They're really cheap, but often in the elite slot, we have other things that we're wanting to take that are better. That kind of takes them from being average to amazing. So
yeah,
they're middle tier.
For me, I would probably actually go with D tier, simply because for 15 points more, I can get a Venerable Dreadnought with better ballistic and weapon skill and a 6+ feel no plane built in. All that for only 15 points. So for me, the Venerable is just straight up better for very little points increase. If I'm gonna spend the points on a Dreadnought, I'm gonna at least buy a Ven. So I guess where do we put it? B, D, or C?
D.
D. All right. So moving on, the Contemptor Dreadnought. This guy does have a invulnerable save built in. He of course has the Duty Eternal. He's faster than the regular Dreadnought, but he really, like the other, like most regular Dreadnoughts, really lacks the firepower for me for his points. I think the Codex version is not really worth taking, when the Relic Contemptor from Forge World is a significant upgrade for very little points difference.
Yep, I would agree with that.
So, and I'm just checking here, Contemptor. Yeah, the Relic Contemptor actually starts out cheaper. He's 10 points cheaper with double heavy plasma. And he has a lot more options. So for me, this guy is a D tier, because you can get all the same options on him that you can with the Relic. And the Relic just has better weapon options. So the aforementioned Venerable Dreadnought, where would you rate him?
So I would step him up a little bit, because he does have a little bit additional benefits with the higher ballistic skill. And he does have some options where you can get that benefit of that ballistic skill shooting across the board. I don't think he's quite D on that because of that. He's still affordable. You can take him in the C ranking with that because of that, but
Yeah.
you're still going to probably take other things
Before taking
in
him.
advance of him.
Yeah. I agree. The Ironclad. I think the Ironclad is even a little bit better than the Venerable. I'd probably put him in B tier because he's tougher. He's got tough 8. They are core, so he can benefit from things like an Apothecary. Well, no, Apothecary's infantry, isn't he?
Yeah.
So yeah. So no feeling of pain for him, but still has Duty Eternal. He's tough 8, which is great, and he can pack double flamers and some hunter killer missiles. He's got some nice options. And because you're probably best off running him with little to no ranged weaponry, because he has little to no ranged weaponry, just double heavy flamers is what I would recommend. His 6-inch move isn't as bad because you can advance him the first turn or two to get him in position and chuck him into the middle of the board and, watch your opponent panic over this tough 8 monster that is going to tear stuff apart. So I'd probably put him in B tier.
Yeah, he also has the ironclad assault launchers, which are kind of a fun little trick to play on your opponent when they get into close combat. And he also does have those hunter killer missiles, which are surprisingly good for the points.
Yeah, they're only 5 points, and you're looking at, I think it's, see, they don't have it
You
listed.
can take 2 of them.
You can take 2 of them, and trying to remember their exact stats. I think they got buffed. I think they're strength 10 now, aren't they?
Yep, strength 10.
Yeah, so strength 10 with great range and good damage. So yeah. Moving on to probably the king of the Dreadnoughts, the Redemptor. This guy is definitely going to be an A tier unit. You will not go wrong taking a Redemptor in your list. He has a crap load of firepower. He's durable. He's got 13 wounds, and his macroplasma is significantly better than it used to be, which means that it's a good choice now. Overcharging, dealing 3 wounds, and for us, we don't have to worry as much about overcharging on him because it's just a mortal wound, and we get a 5+ save against that.
Yeah, it's a fun little trick that opponents might not expect when he gets that. Hopefully you don't roll any ones, but it's going to happen over the course of the battle. You can also take that heavy onslaught cannon to really mulch boards.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to like almost 12 guardman equivalent that it kills with that armament.
Yeah.
So that's a great use for them. So you're really, when you're taking them, you're going to be looking to see what you actually need to take them for, obviously. Do you need anti-horde or do you need anti-marine equivalents? So it really is kind of hit or miss nowadays. So it's really going to have to consider your meta and your local area.
Exactly. And the rest of your list, too. If you have something like Plasma Inceptors, you probably don't need the Macroplasma on him. And you can go with more anti-infantry type stuff. All right, moving into our fast attack slot, Assault Marines. It's another F tier unit. They're 1 point cheaper than Vanguard Veterans and have none of their benefits or options. Nor, for 1 point more, you get an extra attack, an extra leadership, discounted power weapons, and storm shields, and all the goodies that come with them. They're just not worth it.
No. They have some like little tricks that they can do with double flamers and plasma pistol and eviscerators, but it's still not worth it.
It's still not worth it. All right, Outriders.
It's unfortunate these got nerfed.
Yeah, they did not need
a 5
point
exactly
increase.
Sure why.
For whatever reason, people were panicking about 6 attacks on the charge and twin bolt rifles and their movement speed and 4 wounds, and I mean they're a good unit. But that 5-point increase was just unwarranted in my opinion, and I think it takes them down probably from B tier to maybe C tier, unfortunately.
Yeah. You really kind of have to build your list around them.
Yeah.
So they will have to have HQ on a bike to kind of escort them around. Because realistically, while they do have a ton of attacks, you can only take them in the 3-man squad, which was really kind of killer.
Yep. If they had gone to
Because
6
their
man,
point was,
then that would have been, I think they'd be definitely better. But only being able to take 3 of them kind of hurts their durability.
yeah, not only that, but the 3-man unit, they're really just the -1 AP that they're going to be getting on those. So it's not really going to knock over anything dedicated.
Right.
You'll even need buffs to take out a 5-man unit of Primaris.
Yeah.
So that extra 5 was definitely not warranted.
Nope. All right, the Invader ATV Squad, another much maligned unit by people complaining how overpowered it was, and perhaps rezzing one of these things with an Apothecary certainly was a little too much because it has 8 wounds. But I feel like for the points, um, they're not bad, but I think attack bikes are just better. So for that, they are in the same spot that Outriders are, which is C tier for me.
Yep, I could agree with that. They do have some additional durability options, so they're only 80 points with their multi-melta setup. So they're relatively cheap for what you get them for. So instead of having those 2 attack bikes for 110, a slight discount on that if you only have a few extra points. But really, kind of their draw was that they could be revived by an Apothecary, which they can't do anymore.
Yeah.
So I would agree. Attack bites are going to be better on that.
Yep. All right. Continuing into regular bike squads. I kind of feel like these guys just don't really have a place right now. There are better platforms for all of the guns that they can run. They can take something from the special weapons list. I think, what is it, 2 of them can take it. Yeah, up to 2 can take a special weapon. Plasma comes to mind, but again, things like Inceptors and even Hellblasters exist and are better, in my opinion. I think these guys are probably down in D tier for me.
Yeah, there's no reason for us to take these. There was, our veteran bike squads were once upon a time a little bit better, but
Yeah.
there's
They aren't the
nothing that
legends.
brings
So
nothing for us.
I think scout bike squads are in much the same position. Suffering from a bad armor save and just not really doing enough to benefit us to warrant taking them over another choice.
Yeah, they used to be really, really good in 8th edition with the amount of points that they were and the amount of shots that they could put out. But they were increased in price. While they can do some outflanking, which is really kind of niche on them, they're really not anything that we're going to write home about.
Yeah. But the good news is now we're on to attack bikes, which are an excellent unit. Maybe even S tier?
That's definitely an S tier. One of the most mobile things in the book that we have that is cheap and can provide Melta anywhere across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it does suffer from the same thing as the other biker units that we've talked about. Can't go through ruins, but these have stratagem support if you need them. They are cheap and on a relatively small base size, really.
Yep.
They
don't
can get
actually
around
have a
the
base,
board.
which is interesting. They don't come with one, so it's just they're like a vehicle at that point. And another thing to note, I mean, they have multi-meltas, which is nice. They can move and shoot that without penalty, which is excellent because they are not infantry. And furthermore, because while they have fewer shots than something like Eradicators, they are more likely to be in melta range, getting that extra +2 damage per shot. So, excellent, excellent unit. You will not go wrong taking attack bikes.
All right, this next one you're going to have to take out because I got a neophyte emergency that I have to address.
No worries. So that brings us to suppressors. Suppressors are we talked about this recently in our fast attack video. I think they're a solid little utility unit. They're only 100 points. They have a nice suppressing fire ability to deny Overwatch, which got buffed. It now only has to hit the enemy in order to go off instead of killing a model, which is very nice. Excuse me, and they got more shots. They're now heavy 3, so they're not going to deal a ton of damage, but they are solidly, I think, probably in the B, C plus range. So we'll put them in B for now, while we wait for Bob to come back, see what he thinks. Moving on to Inceptors. These guys are specifically the Plasma version, are absolutely an S tier unit. They are a top meta choice for a lot of armies right now. The sheer amount of damage that these guys can put out is just absolutely insane. Firing, because their plasma guns are assault D3 and they have 2 of them, they will be able to have when they shoot at something that is more than 6 models, they're going to get maximum shots, which is really nice. You obviously need to support them with a captain or a chapter master for reroll 1s, because otherwise they will blow themselves up, and blowing up a 3-wound tough 5 model hurts. It definitely hurts. So yeah, have to support them with a captain, but we're probably going to be taking a captain anyway. They are pretty expensive. You'll want to run them 3 to 5 or 5-man. They are 3 to 6 total, but absolutely can't go wrong with plasma Inceptors. The bolt ones just don't cut it, unfortunately. All right, so we spoke about this a little bit in our fast attack video, and for me, the Storm Speeders, the verdict is still out. I have not had a chance to play test them or talk to people who have extensively play tested them. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We just spoke about suppressors. I think they're B tier because they have good utility sitting in the backfield, good range, they can fly. They can do actions for you or suppress Overwatch, and they're cheap.
Yep.
And then we talked about Inceptors, which are obviously an S tier unit.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, they're a great unit to put out a ton of firepower. A little bit expensive, but with some captain support, they're a great unit.
Yep. So that brings us to the Storm Speeders, which is again another unit that we combined into one because it's essentially just war gear difference. The only one that has different stat line wise is going to be the Thunder Strike, which starts at BS +2 instead of +3. Honestly, I haven't. I was just telling everyone I haven't talked to anyone or had a chance to play with these enough to really determine whether I feel like they're worth their points. I feel like they're too expensive for what they bring. So for me, they'd probably be either C or D tier.
It's a tough take right now. I would be more willing to kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. They do have some unique weaponry, but we're not going to take the mainstream. They're going to be fast, a little bit more durable than our normal land speeder there. But I've been scouring lists of all Space Marine types through the tournaments the last 3 months, and very, very, very small percentage of the lists are taking them.
Yeah.
And they're all lists that are not doing well.
Yeah.
So the trends are that they're too expensive for what they do. And realistically, for the points that they Drukhari get a Raider for 85 points that does almost as much damage, is just as durable.
Yeah.
Half as many points.
Yep.
So
D tier.
Yeah, they're not trash, but
they're a tough take right
we're
now.
not going to be probably taking them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're smaller firstborn cousins, the land speeders. All 3 types. We've got the basic one, which weirdly is actually faster. It moves 2 inches faster. And then the Tornado and Typhoon, they have now all been broken out into their own separate data sheets, but we have combined them here because they function very similarly on the tabletop. I think land speeders suffered from the same thing. They're a little too expensive for how fragile they are and the amount of firepower they bring to the board. Once upon a time, heavy bolter Typhoon land speeders were amazing. I never left home without 3 of them, or 2 to 3 of them, and they haven't seen the table since like a long time. So I
Yeah,
think
I
they're
have
kind
a
of in the
ton of
same.
them.
I think they're in the same spot, unfortunately. Sitting down there in D tier is just a unit that is not even very much good filler for the points.
Yeah, they were a good 20 to 30 points cheaper, then there would be a whole different conversation. But when you're looking at 100-point minimum for a lot of these, it's tough.
Yeah.
But
All right, moving into heavy support. We are in the home stretch here. Battle 10 asks, I missed a little. Can someone explain quickly why we have Sword Brothers? I didn't recall anything about this unit except the formation in 8th. Yeah, so we needed something that was distinct visually for company veterans over, Stern Guard. So I used the Sword Brethren model for company veterans. So that is what they are on there for. All right. So Hellblasters. So these are interesting because they are point for point pretty comparable to Inceptors. And spoiler alert, we have a video upcoming where Bob and I will debate the finer points of Hellblasters versus Inceptors, taking them in the list. But we won't do that for now. Instead, we'll just rank them. Where do you feel they fall, Bob?
honestly, I think they're a solid B plus.
Yeah.
They do provide a lot of the same type of things as the Inceptors do, but they're not as mobile, which is kind of one of the things that are good about them.
Yep.
But since we have a video coming on this, I'm not going to go too deeply on it. I don't want to ruin it. So
I would agree. B plus is where I would fit them in. All right, Eliminators, the cowardly snipers.
jeez. So I will admit, they're a tough take, but they're cheap. So if you have some additional points that you need to use up and you still need a home field objective holder, they're a good spot for that. Problem is, heavy support slot can be a little tough for us, especially if we're taking something like the Vanguard detachment. Whereas a suppressor unit might be a little bit better. The Eliminators aren't as good as they used to be, where they could shoot out of line of sight. They still have to have that line of sight, as well as their special rounds aren't as good as they used to be. So that's kind of a downer for me. But they are reasonably durable, being Primaris that can be transhumaned, as well as having concealed position. They also have the potential for covering fire if you take the Instigator Bolt Carbine. And they also have the Camo Cloak, so that's something that's useful as well.
Yeah, plop them in
But
cover.
yeah, so with that being said, it's still somewhat useful to be able to take out strategic HQ or character units. However, it's going to take a couple of rounds to be able to knock out one, most likely, because you're relying on 6s to wound to get that mortal wound.
Yeah.
And most likely they're
They have
going to
an
have an
invul.
invulnerable save.
Yep.
Yep. So
I'm thinking probably C tier is where I feel about them.
honestly, I probably wouldn't even put them that high.
Really?
I would put them at D.
Yeah. All right. Centurion Devastators, who got hit even worse than Assault Centurions. And they're F tier. I'm sorry. There's literally no reason to take these guys over a regular Devastator squad or Eradicators. They're just not worth it. They're too expensive. They got a massive points hike. Yeah, so.
It's sad. I have
Yep.
a lot of them.
All right. Eradicators. One of the newer units from Indominus, of course, and they are top notch for sure.
So
I don't know if they're S tier.
these guys are good. They're
Certainly
not.
at least A tier.
Yeah, they're really good.
Yeah.
You'll probably remember me in the beginning of 9th edition being really skeptical of their benefits, but 9th edition has kind of shown that they can get where they need to be if you want them to. They're not quite as mobile as attack bikes, which is why they're going to be an A tier over an S tier, but they're cheaper. They can put out an insane amount of melta. You can take them in larger squads. So they're a really good unit, honestly. They did take that 5-point increase
They're
to
still
kind of
worth it
nerf
though.
them a little bit.
They do have some interesting
But yeah,
options too. They can take a multi melta, which is nice. Their heavy melta is crazy. Even moving and shooting those things is still better than regular melta. It is more expensive though. So, and these guys are going to be targeted. So, you know, going with cheap on them is probably better. Unless you just have points to burn and you got nowhere else to spend it. So.
yep.
All right. So, if you watched our heavy support video, you know how we feel about Devastators, specifically grab Devastators. So I used the picture of the little grab guy because to me, the grab Devastators are an S tier unit. The rest of the squad probably A, but I think that they are really, really good. The amount of firepower they put out now is excellent. Yeah, they lost that strat, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, they're no good anymore." But they're doing a flat 2 damage to 3+ armor, which is insane. They gain 6 inches of range, which really helps them a lot. They don't need a drop pod anymore. They can sit on our home objective and just launch volleys of death across the board.
Yeah, these things are insane good. So I hope you bought some already.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're a great objective sitter in your deployment zone with the grab specifically. This is what we're going to be talking about because those other ones are a little bit not as good. But 30 inches on the grab is really huge. Get them up in a rune, or if you're sitting on that objective, depending on where it's at, get them in a nice line of sights, and your opponent's going to be trying to come to you. They have the range to knock anything you have. Aspect scan, if something drops close by them, they're going to get smoked, honestly. Yep. And they're so cheap.
Yep.
135 points for the amount of damage that these things can put out is just stupid.
They're a better heavy bolter.
It's stupid. Yeah.
So
the only thing that the heavy bolter potentially could be better against is if you're fighting something that reduces damage or is not a 3+ save that still has a reasonable amount of damage. But most cases, the grav cannon is going to be better for cheaper and more shots. It is even useful against higher number infantry. So
Yep.
just through the sheer amount of shots that it can put out.
Yep, exactly. Oliver asks, what is the best weapons for a 10-man Vanguard Veteran Squad? There's a bunch of different ways you can go with this. Bob and I prefer a mix. You'll see there Relic Blade 3 times, Storm Shield and Thunder Hammers 3 times, Lightning Claws and Storm Shields, and 3 Chainsword and Storm Shields. It gives you a nice mix to deal with hordes, to deal with heavy targets. If the Chainswords are in there because you're probably going to lose a few anyway along the way, and they're good at clearing chaff. But the Lightning Claws are good at clearing chaff too. So if you have the extra 9 points to spend on 3 more Lightning Claws, you certainly can, but I would wait until you are at the end of your list building before doing that. So that's our preferred loadout. Eli asks, what is the 4th unit along with F tier? They're
Heavy
F tier.
Intercessors.
No. What
That's
is
the
unit?
Heavy Intercessor.
What unit is 4th along the F tier? 1, 2, 3, 4. No, that is the Veteran Intercessors. Heavy Intercessors are D tier.
Oh yeah, they're there.
Yeah, they don't. There's not really an image of Veteran Intercessors, so I had to go with a guy who looked more veteran. And I guess taking your helmet off as a Space Marine is a sign of being veteran. I don't know. So that's why we went with that. All right. So moving on, Thunderfire Cannon. Man, did this thing get nerfed. It is solidly down here in F tier. Not only did it take a points hike, but they nerfed the crap out of its gun. It now is strength 4 instead of 5 and has no AP. It's just awful. No reason to take this thing anymore. This thing went from hero to 0 really fast.
So I am so happy that I resold my Thunderhammer or my Thunderfire cannon when I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the writing on the wall coming, so I sold all the 3 that I had for significant profit, I might add. And then they just went
they went poof.
Trash.
Yep.
I mean, they were so good, and now they're just not even. Don't even look at them.
Yep. Fire Strike servo turrets. They at least have decent weapons, but they're not. They're not really worth taking for us. At best, these things are D tier. At worst, they're F tier, in my opinion.
I'm going to go with F. They're too expensive for what you get.
Yep. And we have other ways of bringing the same type of firepower. So, it can take the twin accelerator autocannon. I'd rather run suppressors, which are faster and deny overwatch. Or it can take a twin las talon, but it's only 24 inches, and this thing moves 3 inches. So yeah. All right, moving into the tanks of heavy support. We've got the Hunter. There are not a lot of aircraft in the meta right now that are doing well. So I don't really see, especially for a one-shot weapon, that this thing is really doing that great. For me, it's kind of an F tier.
Yeah. Yeah. In later years, it was better, but
yeah,
one shot is no good. It does have the range. It does. Yeah. I can't even try.
But I mean, there's plenty of ways to deal with aircraft. Honestly, for us, the best way to deal with aircraft is going to assault it with Vanguard vets with jump packs. So, all right, another anti-air platform, the Stalker. This, I think it's a little better than the Hunter. At least it has volume of fire.
Yep.
But again, it no longer takes a negative to shoot at ground targets, which is nice. And it shoots a lot more shots at aircraft. But again, unless you just have somebody running lots and lots of flyers in your meta, there's no reason to take this thing. So it's going to sit down there in F tier for me too.
Yeah. Things that are specifically built to deal with aircraft right now are just not there.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
it's not needed. All right, so the Whirlwind, a tank that's actually decent.
Yeah, and a lot of people kind of turn their nose up at this thing, but it's a great objective holder. You can hide it in your back corner
Doesn't need line
or
of
wherever
fire.
you really need to. So it's going to be incidental damage, but it can take out some of those annoying units that are out there. Coming to mind are Cenobite Servitors. You're not going to probably fight another Black Templar player, but there's similar units out there for most armies that kind of hide away out of line of sight to get scramblers. And these guys can target those units.
That
Lictors
Lictor.
come to mind.
Yep.
Mandrakes,
Yeah.
which are going to be really popular coming up. These guys can take those things out.
Yep.
And they're fairly cheap. So, I mean, they're not too terribly expensive, and they have that nice ability, just like the suppressors, to be able to deny Overwatch. So they're definitely useful for your build. So I would say they're C plus to B minus, somewhere around in there.
I'd probably put them in B tier. Just they're essentially a heavy support version of suppressors, except they don't need line of fire to shoot stuff, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, moving on to the Predator again. For those of you, if you're just joining us, the Predator is another one of those ones that we combine into the same data sheet because they're essentially just different loadout for the same tank. I think if you're gonna run a tank for anti-tank firepower, I think Predator is not a terrible take. It's certainly better than like the Stalker and the Hunter and stuff like that. I'd probably put it C plus or maybe B minus tier because for the points you do get some decent firepower out of it, especially the Trilas version.
Yeah, they're relatively cheapish. 170 points, 180 points, depending on what you're going to be taking.
Yeah.
But again, they're vehicles which don't get buffs unless you're specifically taking a Techmarine.
Techmarine, yeah.
So that's something to consider. Plus, in today's meta, las cannons aren't as good as Melta.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a thing to think about as too.
Yep. All right. So should we put them in C or B?
C.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too.
Not having core is going to be kind of.
It's going to be hurting. So their big brother, the Gladiators. Now, once again, we combined all three of these because it's literally just a loadout. That being said, of these three variants, if I had to rate the three variants, I would put the Lancer in F tier because the Lancer is just garbage. It's way too expensive for what it does. The Laser Destroyer is just terrible. It's only 2 shots. It only packs Stormbolters as a side weapon. It's not good for how many points it costs. The other two, though, the Reaper and the Valiant, are both pretty solid. I'd say they're probably C plus, B minus tier again, just like the Predator is. They're a little expensive, but they are tough 8, and they throw out a good amount of firepower. So if you need anti-infantry, the Reaper is absurd amount of shots. The Valiant has double meltas and double multi-meltas, and a twin las talon. So you're looking at 8 strength 8 plus shots a turn, and vehicles can move and fire. So I'd put it in solid C plus tier.
Yeah, C is okay. They still, suffer from not having core, but
Yep.
At least they have the firepower that's reasonably meta to be able to contribute to the battle.
Yeah.
more meaningfully than a Predator would be.
Yep, absolutely. So the Vindicator is next. Sadly, the Vindicator, despite getting the Siege Shield thing that it has on the front to have actual rules, which are pretty decent, it gives it a 2+ save. I just think they're too expensive for having a single heavy D6 weapon. It has blast, but most of the time the things you're going to shoot it at, blast is irrelevant. And it's short range, and that's its only armament. Um, and that's troubling because it's easy to tag this thing in close combat since it can't shoot its blast gun in close combat. So unfortunately, the Vindicator is probably an F tier.
As much as I want to say I disagree with that, I have to. I love the Vindicator. I
I love
love
it
the
too.
feel of it.
It's such a cool tank.
It's
You might be able to like get
very
away with
Templar.
it. Yeah, you might be able to get away with if you have a bunch of veteran 40k players in your meta, running it once or twice for fear factor of causing some Vindicator PTSD for people. Um, but it's not going to do a lot of work for you, unfortunately. All right. So, speaking of unfortunate things, the mighty Land Raider. Again, we combined all three profiles because they all are essentially sitting in the same spot as far as their battlefield role, and it's bad. I'm reluctant to put them in F tier just because I love the Land Raider Crusaders so much.
Don't do it. We get so much hate.
I know. So I'm gonna put it in D tier because it's still a big, tough tank. It does have a power of the machine spirit, which is now a stratagem that lets you operate on top profile for the turn. Um, and yeah, the biggest problem with the Land Raider right now is it sort of lost its role. Like the Land Raider Crusader was primarily like get your scariest unit across the board as fast as possible. We don't need that anymore. Our scariest unit that needs a ride is Terminators, and Black Templars are much faster than we used to be, and Terminators are way more durable than they used to be. So they don't really need the extra durability of having a ride or speed. Right now, the only thing that I would put in a Land Raider would be Assault Centurions, which, again, if you're running Assault Centurions, you're probably playing a casual game anyway. So, taking a Land Raider isn't necessarily that bad at that point because you're not playing in a competitive environment at that point. So, um, unfortunately, I love the Land Raider, but it's just in a bad spot right now.
Yeah, let's be honest. All of us have a bunch of Land Raiders
I
sitting on our
have
shelves. We
4.
want to use them. And the
So,
Land Raider Crusader, Games Workshop at least made an attempt to give us something to want to use them.
yeah,
But
yeah,
then they went in 9th edition, said that things don't Overwatch, so
yeah.
they kind of
Nerfed
took
that.
back the utility of the stratagem. So
Steven says
yeah, they can
deserves
shoot.
D just for the looks. Yes, I agree. It's such a cool looking tank. It's so iconic. To me, if you think of 40k vehicle, the first thing that always comes to my mind is the Land Raider. It's just so iconic.
Yep.
So, moving along to the Repulsor. This guy is definitely F tier because
Just get rid of them.
it's even worse than the Land Raider durability wise, and it's more expensive. And nothing Primaris needs a ride, honestly, especially not for us. So Repulsor is potato.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because there's a ton of memes out there with like the zillion guns all
Yeah,
over this
yeah.
thing. It still doesn't help it. It
No,
still doesn't help it.
still doesn't help it. Speaking of doesn't help it, an even bigger gun version of it is the Repulsor Executioner, which is also now F tier. In 8th, this thing was great, and then they nerfed the crap out of its main gun, the laser destroyer. It went from being able to fire twice to now just getting +1 ballistic skill. which is lame.
Yep.
So they did buff its damage, but that doesn't help it because it has literally half the number of shots. So yeah, this thing has a transport capacity for some reason, and yeah, it's bad all around.
Yeah, and it lost one of the key things that Black Templars did over everything else with this, is being able to castle them up with a Techmarine
Hmm.
or a Captain and give them a Aurelian Shroud to
Yep.
be able to shoot. And now we can't do that because they don't have core, so
Yep.
there's really no reason to take them.
Yep. All right, so that moves us into transports. The Venerable Rhino, another iconic.
It's solid.
Yeah.
It's solid, average use, but it's still cheap enough to it's useful for some niche lists. I'm gonna try and get out a list here pretty quick, or maybe we could do another live stream on building something
Yeah,
around
absolutely.
this. But the Rhinos with Crusaders are reasonably decent. They can fulfill similar roles as some of those like Harlequins or such lists where they utilize the transports. But the one thing to mention with them is they're not open topped. They move a little bit slower with that, but they're reasonably priced. Your opponent has to kill the rhino before it can get to the stuff inside.
Yep.
They're pretty good. I think you can double up on their stormbolters as well, so it's still providing something to the battle.
Yeah.
And
Where would you rate
ultimately,
it?
yeah, I think they're C.
Yeah.
They're a good C unit.
Yeah.
You're not going to take them in every unit, but they're not bad.
Yeah. Their more heavily armed cousin, the Razorback. I think kind of the same
I mean,
role.
yeah, I agree. They're going to be still that middle tier C.
Yeah.
They have
They,
guns, which are
yep.
nice.
Heavy bolters are better now, which is nice. They did lose the Laz Plaz combo, which is unfortunate because that was a great combo weapon. All right, that brings us to the Primaris Rhino version, the Impulsor. So while they lost Fly, which sucks, I still think it's a B tier transport for us. What do you think?
I'll defer to you on this one. I think losing Fly is an astronomically huge nerf to this unit. It basically killed the combo that we had. I don't know. Someone at Games Workshop just decided that Vanguard Veterans with a Judiciar and an Repulsor was just too good for the Black Templar, so they had
You
to
think it
nerf
was
the Fly,
us, huh?
had to nerf the Judiciar. They're like, they saw those Black Templars, they're like, oh my gosh, one turn charges.
Yeah.
No, but it's still you can still pull off that combo with us. It's just harder to do. You have to make sure that you're not running over ruins, getting over that terrain, that type of thing. But it's still open topped. You can charge, or I'm sorry, disembark out of it,
Disembark. Yeah.
and then use
Devout
devout
push.
push. So that's
Yeah.
still handy,
I think
and they're
the
fairly durable.
combo is not nearly as good as it used to be. I think that it's still workable. I think it depends a lot on your meta and your what your boards look like. If you have lots of ruins or things with breachable, it's going to struggle because it's large to get around. But if you have not as much ruins, I think it can still be done. It's just not nearly as good as it used to be. So for me, it's a B transport because it also can pack a invulnerable save and it has decent firepower out of the gate. Um, so yeah.
I
Eli
would
asks,
definitely
"Can I
agree.
have a quick run over of the assault intercessors?" So they were earlier. We've been going through by the data sheets in the book, but in case you can't see the thing right here, we put them in B tier. Solid troops choice. Going to be better than if you're going to run like a battalion. You're going to run probably 1 to 2 squads of these easily. All right. So moving on to the drop pod. I think a drop pod is a pretty A tier unit. If you're going to take things that can go in it. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, they're still excellent. The only downside that I really don't like about them is the fact that they can be tagged and basically protect a unit
Yeah,
of your opponents.
because they can't fight
But
back.
yeah, they're not going to be able to fight back. But being able to come onto the board on turn 1, you can basically hold the army back in reserve, and whether your first turn or second turn, and get them on the board so you don't lose
Yeah.
in advantageous places on the board. The downside, again, with that is a smart player could potentially screen.
Yep.
But they have to go around the drop pod or kill it to potentially, if you take enough of them, so you can use them to control the board, which is harkening back to 5th edition drop pods.
Yep.
Where you can manipulate the board. So they're a great unit. We did do a stream on them. I probably will do a more in-depth, detailed tactica on drop pod armies in general on how to use them. But it's a solid unit. They're not very expensive. There is also a Dreadnought version of this as well from Forge World that does similar.
Yep.
But yeah, good solid unit.
All right, the Landspeeder Storm. I'm gonna let you take this one because I constantly forget this unit exists.
So this is another unit that it's unfortunate that scouts are as bad as they are now, because the Landspeeder Storms were a really good combo with them. Now you can still take them without the scouts in them, by virtue of being a dedicated transport. You're just not going to be able to put anything in it, which is okay. They do have Scout, which is a nice ability. Open topped, which is not going to be applicable. Outflank. So some great things, but really what you're going to be taking them for is their ability to give the -1s to hit via their stratagem, which give me a sec here. I'm going to pull it up here. I believe it is Shock and Awe. There we go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so you can't, it's a Firewalk prevent, or I'm sorry, Overwatch prevent, and Set to Defend prevent, and then subtract 1 from the hit roll, which is really kind of critical. You get them outflanked, you can take an objective with it, prevent some of those dangerous units from doing some hitting. So it's a nice utility unit for only 55 points, and it still has some pretty good guns on it. You got that heavy bolter and the Cerberus launchers, so it's good anti-infantry, incidental damage. Honestly, for 55 points, it's a good option for you.
Where would you put it?
I like them. I honestly, it's not going to fit in every list, but I think it's good enough for the 55 points to be in the B tier.
All right. The unlikely B tier. All right. So now we're getting into the aircraft. The Stormhawk Interceptor. Unfortunately, this one took a big points hike, and aircraft are not nearly as durable as they once were, once upon a time. I remember when you needed 6s to hit them. And for me, the Stormhawk is just too expensive for what it does, so it falls into the D tier for me.
Yeah. You can put more guns on it than our next unit, but it's still very expensive.
Yeah.
There's other things that we can put on the board that put out way more firepower that are more durable.
Yep. The Storm Talon is our next one. And honestly, I was really hot on the Storm Talon when they announced the changes, like some of the previews and stuff like that for 9th, because the Storm Talon used to have an ability called Strafing Run, where you got +1 to shoot against things that did not have fly. And I was salivating over its points drop and running las cannons on it at BS 2 plus. but then they took that ability away from it. So it's not nearly as good as I was hoping it was going to be for ninth. And unfortunately, I think it's either going to be in D tier or maybe I think it's better than the Stormhawk, but not by a lot. So maybe C tier, but somewhere
No.
in between for me.
Yeah, it's going to be in the D tier. They're reasonably priced, but again, you still don't get too much for what you pay for as far as the weaponry that it comes on.
And how fragile it is.
If yeah, I mean, it's my favorite flyer. I won't lie.
It's cool.
I,
It has like an
it's a cool looking
Apache kind of
model.
Apache kind of feel to it.
And it
So
potentially could do some damage, and it would be worth it if it was around 140 points, maybe.
yeah,
But not being able to contest objectives as a flyer is
it's tough.
kind of tough. Yeah.
All right, so the Storm Raven, often called the Flying Land Raider, is gonna be right there with the Land Raider. In D, maybe even F. It's so expensive, and it's not even as durable as the Land Raider. So it may even be F tier, unfortunately, because it's cool. It can carry a
Do
dreadnought.
it. Do
So,
it. Yeah.
so yeah. Unfortunately, it's just too expensive. I mean, I think the base loadout for it is like over 300 points, which is significantly um, more than the Land Raider. Let's see, Storm Raven, 310 points as its base cost, um, and that doesn't include that includes an assault cannon, which you probably want something more powerful than that. And the Typhoon missile launcher, the multi-meltas are going to be better. So it's too expensive for how fragile it is. It has 2 less wounds than the Land Raider. It does not have a 2+ save. It does have a -1 to hit, but um, being an aircraft, it can't control or contest or objectives. It's just
Which
it's
is
just too
good.
hard. Yeah. So
Eighth edition, where those terrible units are out. When you have multiples of them, they're kind of annoying to deal with. But right now, there have to be a fundamental change in the edition to really kind of make flyers useful,
yeah,
except for in some rare cases
yeah,
for some other armies.
yep.
They're
Just
just
not for
not
us.
points economical.
And then the Hammer Fail is going to be our last unit, and I think it's gonna, no question, it's going straight into the F
This,
tier.
this is
For
the Z
those,
tier.
for the Z tier, yeah, it should have its own tier, the literally unplayable tier. For those of you that don't know, fortifications are basically unplayable right now, especially big ones like the Hammerfall bunker, um, even that new Death Guard one. Uh, in order to place a fortification, it has to go in your deployment zone, and it has to be more than 3 inches away from any other terrain feature. Well, with today's boards being mostly smaller sized and the amount of terrain that you really need to use in a ninth edition game, that means that you are basically not going to be able to place this thing, which means that it counts as destroyed. Even if
Yep.
GW were to fix that, it's still a god awful unit. Its main gun is okay, but the arrays are just not very good. It just doesn't do enough for its points. It can't control objectives because it's a fortification. So even if they fix that, this thing is still in F tier. So, all right. So that brings us to the end of the Codex portion. So now moving on to our specific units, the Black Templar um, specific units. Let's start with the High Marshal himself.
An amazing unit.
Yes.
Let's be honest. For 155 points, you get a chapter master, which costs us normally 40 points on a generic captain. So
It's roughly the
you're going to
same
be,
cost
yep,
for a tier.
exactly. And you get additional stuff with them. So,
Yep.
obviously you got the combi melta that comes standard on him, the Sword of the High Marshals, which is
Which is
plus
nice.
2 strength. So he's wounding Death Guard on 3s.
Yeah.
2 damage, which won't make a difference on the Death Guard, obviously, but it does get that D3 additional attacks, which is
nice.
fantastic.
And he buffs everyone else around him with +1
Yeah,
strength.
yeah,
So he's definitely an A tier unit for us.
yeah. He's a great unit, especially if you're looking for those overlapping aura builds. So it was mentioned earlier in the chat, comboing him with something that normally is not as strong, with a strength 4 weapon. So assault intercessors come to mind here, or even company veteran unit that we mentioned that we're bringing along with those, with lightning claws, can make them really punch above their points value.
Yep. All right, so Chaplain Grimaldus. I'm going to venture out and say Grimaldus is S tier. He is stupid
Definitely.
cheap. Stupid cheap for his points. He gets a Deny the Witch. He has a melee buff for everyone around him. Plus just being a chaplain. And he gets 2 litanies and is not a Master of Sanctity. So we can take a Master of Sanctity and Grimaldus for 95 points. He's just ridiculous. He's so good.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say about him. Alex pretty much covered that. 95 points for essentially as a Master of Sanctity. The only downside I can say with him is you can't give him a relic to give him the Ancient Breviary or Wise Orator. So that's the only one
Yep.
that I would say on that.
But given the fact that you get 2 litanies with him, I think makes up for that. So.
Yeah. Now,
All right.
the reason why I would really take him on the S tier above the A tier is just simply because you can combo and get 2 chaplains on the board for him. You do have those additional buffs, and he's so much cheaper than everything else. Doesn't have the mobility that you would necessarily take him, but the list that you're going to be taking him in are those aura overlap, and getting that huge discount on that is.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, so the Emperor's Champion, another signature unit for us. Unfortunately, this guy doesn't do anything for the rest of the army. He is, bar none, the best character killer in the game for his points. There are other units that kill characters better. Thinking of units like some of the new Drukhari characters, but they generally cost more. The Succubus not, but Drazar is another great character killer, but he costs a lot more. He's 140 points, I think. And the Emperor's Champion is 85. The problem is he's an HQ, and HQ slots are very valuable, especially for us. We want to be using those HQ slots to buff our units, not be melee murder machines, because he is very much a glass cannon. He is very fragile. He's only got 4 wounds. Yeah, he's got a 2+ save and a 4+ invul, but with the amount of multi-damage weapons out there, even something hitting him like a Power Fist, you only got to fail 2 saves and he's dead. So he is definitely a great combat character, but he doesn't buff our army, and that is why, in my opinion, he is C tier. What do you think, Bob?
In the vein of having him in HQ, he is a C tier.
Yeah.
If he was elite, then I would maybe bump him up to the B tier. But it's really tough to validate him as an HQ.
Yeah. Or if
But
he
he
was like
can
if
kill
you had
pretty.
a captain or chaplain, if he was a no force org slot, I mean, yeah, that'd be worthwhile taking for him. So, moving on. Last 2 units, we got the Cenobite Servitors. They are great
If you're
and
not
cheap.
thinking, if these things are not S tier, or if you think otherwise, then you are playing the wrong army.
They're 18 points, and they can sit on an objective, hiding behind obscuring terrain, doing actions for you and things like that. 18 points. And if Grimaldus is in your army, they don't take up an elite slot. These guys are silly good. And if there happens to be another unit nearby them, for whatever it's worth, you get a 4+ against mortal wounds instead of a 5+. Really, really good, cheap unit to fill points and do things for you that are going to win you games, like sit on objectives and score points.
Yep.
And that brings us
are
to the last, our Crusaders. Oh no. Crusader squads. Where do you feel they fall?
I think these are on the same wavelength as our assault intercessors, as far as that goes. So they're solid A tier, I think.
We have the
For
assault ensign
or
B
B
tier.
tier, B tier,
Yeah,
B tier.
I agree. They're cheap. That's one thing that's great about them is they're only 75 points. For whatever reason, GW decided to be like, hey, have some Crusaders 2-wound Marines at 15 points apiece. Okay. Sure, that's fine with us. We're happy with that. They can sit on an objective with a grav cannon for 10 points and plink away at stuff and hold down that objective for you. Great little troops unit, especially if you're trying to squeeze in a battalion, squeeze as much as you can out of a battalion. It's a good, solid troops choice. And you can run multiple
Yeah,
of them.
it's
Yeah,
so this is the one unit in our list that right now we don't typically take a whole lot of troops, but if you were going to and you want to take a ton of them to play that MSU game, this is why they are so good. As chat mentioned, because they're so cheap, this is really kind of is more borderline unit.
yeah,
While they're not necessarily going to be as damaging as the assault intercessors, you can take more of them on the board
yeah,
because of that. And they still have the durability without obviously transhuman of being a 2-wound Marine. So you still have to put a reasonable amount of firepower into them. Could get even more durable if you really wanted to, taking those scouts with a smoke screen, but a very solid unit.
yeah.
But in my opinion, I would just still keep them cheap at the 75 points.
I agree. All right. Well, that wraps it up for us with our tier list. I will type this out for you guys. I know the images, sometimes a lot of these models look the same, especially with small little boxes. So I'm going to type this out for you guys. Once the stream is finished, I will put it down in the description section so you can see each unit and how we rank them. Yeah, so things coming up. Be on the lookout for that Hellblaster Inceptor video coming up. We just released part 2 of our list building, how to start series, how to get started in Black Templars. We just put out the 1,000-point one. We do have the 2,000-point one coming, so that will look out for that in the next week or so. Yeah, as always, thank you guys so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much to everyone who supported us, especially our Patreons. Yeah, it
Yep.
was great hanging out with you guys today, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. Have a good one.